So introductions. I am this guy, Stephen DaCosta, the Executive Director of this thing, Link Digital. It was started 2001. I am also a developer, except I haven't developed extensively in Drupal. In fact, I don't even think I've installed it once. But here I am speaking at Drupal ACT Meetup. The thing is, I did develop a CMS. So for about 2003, I developed my own CMS, and I've been on a trajectory with that where we've evolved it over time for lots of different customers, kind of meeting their needs. And the way that I see it is that CMS is either developed from or evolved from a sort of a developer's perspective, which would have been mine, or a designer's perspective, which is sort of like the Adobe side of things. NetObjects Fusion back in the day was sort of that kind of content management system. And usually as these things evolve, if they're successful, they come to meet in the middle. One of the reasons why I really like Drupal is it seems to be a product that's really quite ready to hit that middle spot, and it really meets the design side as well as the back-end sort of requirements from my perspective. So what is Open Public? Well, it's a website where, it's for the people, and you can download a distribution. It's Drupal CMS distribution, so it's kind of being packaged up with Drupal 7. It's tailored for government, which kind of just means that it's really had some security, accessibility, and responsive stuff packaged in within it to address it specifically to the needs of government. It has some integrated modules and workflows, which have been sort of packaged up again to meet the needs of government. And as a sort of pre-packaged, pre-wired content management distribution, it's got some example content in there, and it's been pre-configured for workflows and things like that that might be useful for government agencies that might need particularly sort of workflows around approving content before it goes live and stuff like that. And I should say that, it's a project that's come out of a customer environment. So Phase 2 Technology out of the US have developed Open Public. They're kind of spearheading the development of it through client engagements and then taking that work back into this distribution, learning the best practice approach. Next, please. So I thought a good slide to go through. I touched on it earlier. Why are we, Link Digital, supporting Open Public or even Drupal? These are a few of our most recent projects. This is a project for the National Archives of Australia, basically 20,000 image records put on a website and then made available to people to browse and have a look around, and then to tag and hopefully create more of a narrative around the photos, the images. So it's basically a crowdsourcing application to get more narrative about our primary documents being photos. We've also done some work with Human Services. We did the design, incorporating both web design and the tablet mobile sort of responsive designs, and templated those for accessibility purposes, and then provided those to Human Services to integrate with their Documentum CMS. And launched about September last year. We did a fairly big site for Uber Global, which is a cloud hosting company in Canberra, national, about the third largest hosting company in Australia. And a key requirement of it was basically high availability. It needed to have highly redundant sort of connections to the database so that if the database died under load, the site would still perform quite well. And I think what this paints a picture of for us is probably over the last 2 to 3 years in particular, web projects that we've been doing are becoming more enterprise. And that's not just because we're standing out and winning those jobs. I think it's more that the clients themselves are recognising that an enterprise project doesn't need to be managed by a professional service vendor around an incumbent software platform. And web developers who might have previously had some credibility around just design or usability experience are actually gaining a lot of credibility around the back office type stuff, the integrations with complicated systems, and doing that well. And I've got a slide later that talks a bit to that. So that's why we're interested in Drupal and Open Public. We see this complicated set of enterprise sort of requirements being met, certainly by our studio, but in the long term, we need to manage those as a sort of a platform. So we're looking to focus our efforts, and Open Public with Drupal is probably the way to go. Next. So what we see in the Open Public distribution is basically Drupal itself has its own roadmap. It's moved from 6 to 7, and it has a journey to go before it gets to 8. And we like the iterations that are coming out. As I said at the start, going from the design side of the spectrum all the way to the development side of the spectrum, Drupal is really hitting that medium mark now, and the path moving forward is quite clear. As a digital agency consulting into the future with our clients, It makes a lot of sense. We're seeing an enterprise-grade network of support around Drupal. It's easy to sort of compare content management systems, whether they be open source, or actually open source content management systems, with proprietary web platforms or information management systems by other big software vendors. And I guess one of the weaknesses of open source in the past is it's community-led and the community can support it. Well, that's a strength as well, but it's a weakness in that how do you engage with that community? How do you actually get the work? How do you define a service level agreement from the community to provide you with something like a product roadmap for the content management system? So a couple of the things that are emerging around Drupal. Acquia is a company, a global company that provides hosting and professional services on Drupal installs, and they are developing best practice around performance and optimization on Drupal platforms, and they can be integrated with a small agency like mine as part of a meshed service delivery model, which is quite exciting. Community partners, both locally and globally. So I talked about that sort of managed roadmap for customers. It's actually in my interest as a owner of a digital agency to promote best practice in a client organisation, even if they're going to go with a competitor to do a project. Because ultimately, if that competitor is using the same sort of approach that I would use, at some point in that client's future, I may be able to consult in and add more value to that engagement over the long term. And I think as a community of developers, if you're on that supplier side, that's really important. And I say locally and globally because there are some really biggish companies forming now. Wunderkraut was announced at DrupalCon Munich, 120 developers across 9 countries now in Europe. Phase 2 Technology, you met the guys there, and they're really, good guys. And there's about 80 odd of them in the US. And I guess the last thing that goes with that is subject matter experts. A lot's been said about, there's a module for that in Drupal. Well, behind every module, there's typically a subject matter expert that's driving that project or that module's development. So it might be a module that pertains to security. It can be kind of hard to go into a project with a federal government agency and say that we've got security covered because we've got this module. But if you can tap into the community, the developer who's actually developing that module, and have a conversation with them, you bring that subject matter expert into your project team. And I see a lot of that, especially in the Drupal community when I went to Munich the other week. Just having one-to-one conversations with guys who really know their stuff on some of these issues. And I touched on this before. It's an opportunity for DevOps to really drive better business outcomes. There's a world, back in 2001 when I started Link, there was kind of a world emerging around websites. And there were graphic design or advertising agencies attempting to work with comms units within agencies to build websites that looked good and had nice content on them. There were IT firms that were also trying to build websites for IT units within agencies. And as that sort of those supply side and the demand side started to get an understanding of the two silos being connected, you started to see the crossover. So my company kind of came in the middle to link them all together so that we could have a sensible conversation on both the design, the comms, and the technology, the sort of integrations with whether it be the comms team in the client in the agency or the IT development team in the agency. However, if that were just the two sort of axes of this problem that we're trying to solve, the more that the web platform is seen as an integration tool or a productivity tool within an agency, the more axes there are. So you might be solving a HR problem, you might be solving a logistics problem in terms of service delivery. All these sorts of things come into the area of DevOps. And developers are really well placed in the center of these axes to provide really easy solutions, quick solutions to some of these organizational problems. So going with something like Drupal, where there is a module for that, you can really rapidly deploy great value solutions for your customers. Another point here that Jessica, my business partner, made sure I put in here was that a Drupal CMS makes our work consistent and more transferable. With agencies basically bouncing around from different portfolios from time to time based on how things change politically, sometimes we have clients who are with a particular agency one day and then they have to be managed by a different agency the next. it's a much easier proposition if that migration of responsibility is just by changing the admin around either the hosting or the CMS framework for that particular website. We've been involved in projects where the change of a lead agency under one of our clients means we had to help with a complete physical migration from one server infrastructure to another. And I just think that's a really inefficient way to manage public resources. So Drupal, from our point of view, it's a really good way to bring some consistency to the information management platform with agencies, right the way from the infrastructure all the way up to content authors and the way that they're trained and they understand how to manage content. Last point there, I just thought I'd throw in there, open government, open data, collaborating with a community of people. These are all good things. And you know, we're excited to be part of that. Even if we've come in a little bit late, I kind of think that we've had the philosophy right from the start. Having said all that, I want to pass it over to Martin now, because he'll actually get into how Open Public is structured and how it kind of looks when you think about what Drupal is.
Hi, I'm Martin Ollman. So what you get, everybody knows, this is Drupal when you install it, Drupal 7. And obviously what you get is you're getting a whole lot of extensibility from the core up. So obviously we know it's in the core. We know we're really excited about what's moving into the core from Drupal 8. So some views and some really nice things. And I really like that model of modules getting promoted into the core. And I think it's a really great way to do it. So we're seeing a lot of that now in the Drupal 8 roadmap. Some of these things coming into there. So the contribute modules and the custom modules are the things that just continually evolving as far as new things coming out, supporting best practice, supporting new things like responsive design. So we're seeing the community drive the functionality into the core, which is great. The custom modules, I could talk about that a little bit about why you would need to write a custom module, and I can pretty much say 99% of the time you don't need to write a custom module. It's the sort of thing, custom modules are the sort of thing, if you're doing a distribution, you need to start thinking about that because you need to wire some things up and you want to basically get, you know, the installation and you want to get the thing installed and just appearing. So you do a lot of customization in modules to do that. That sort of links with profiles, which we'll get into, but basically at that level, that's your functionality and feature set of Drupal. We all know that pretty well. We know about the themes that come with Drupal at the moment. We'll talk about some responsive design themes getting promoted up into Drupal 8, which is great. The pre-built commercial ones, obviously there's people selling themes out there, responsive themes, and they're attractively priced, and I wouldn't discount them. I'd say that some of the themes that come with Drupal are best practice. Again, you don't really tend to sort of build your own theme, you sort of sub-theme a theme. So Zen is probably the most known theme that's been sub-themed, and now we're looking at Amiga, and there's some other really interesting themes coming out that are HTML5 and responsive. So does anybody know why we would want to move to HTML5 at all? Is it something that everybody understands why we're going to this new language? Not language, but another iteration of HTML.
Comes after 4.
Comes after 4.
It must be better.
The main thing is that there's about 12 tags in HTML5 that are relevant to us as developers, and there are things like, and it's really geared towards breaking that content down. So we've got the navigation tab, the section tab, a side tab, content, footer, header. So these are the things that add to the language which actually make the page semantic, more readable for us developers. So it's easy for us to see. And the other thing is that it's a much more flexible way to actually discount things and hide things. We're used to using divs to hide stuff, and so, you know, if it's a mobile, hide this thing. And by putting these extra tags into the language, it means that a navigation is now navigation. It's not div class equals navigation. So the language is becoming more semantic and verbose. So HTML5, if you look towards a theme that has HTML5, that's really what you're getting. You're getting a new set of tags that basically, in plain English, say what they are. That's the only difference. There's some other things happening with the video and the audio, and those things are all coming into HTML5, and they're all going to be reflected in the theme. So, you know, native video and native music, MP3 or OGG files. So some of those things are in the language. So that's what you're getting when if you pick a HTML5 theme now. There's some of the things you'll start to see support for those things. So that's in the box. That's what's installed, whichever way you go. with a pre-built or bring your own in. And that's the code. So the database, obviously, we've got the nuts and bolts of how everything's configured and set up. So we've got content types, that should have been fixed, that should say nodes. Categories, blocks, menus, user roles, access controls. So that's the sort of basic layer of Drupal where you have to get involved with that to set up your pages, set up menus, content types. And that works really well, I think. That's a really nice way to do things. Blocks is a bit clunky, but that's changing as well. And templates, blocks and templates is always an issue. Not an issue, but just a bit of a hurdle to get over to make sure everything's right. Then you've got your content, and then your people adding documentation and content and media to it. And then we've got basically what we output to the client or the user. We do it to browser, different variations. We look at sort of sending out feeds, and then we're starting to cater to mobiles and things like that. So Drupal 7 at the moment, that's what it looks like. And it's a great platform to build from. So for you to develop in Drupal now, you get the base, which is all this. And then the question is, what modules do I need? What do I need my theme to do? My content people and my comms and all that kind of stuff, what do they need to do at this level? And that's probably all mapped out and fairly straightforward. And then this is starting to get a bit more difficult and relevant, is that, okay, we need to, this thing, we know that mobile's overtaking desktop, so we need to address that. So we're starting to see some of that bubble up to the surface as well, as far as this thing can be adapted. And then there's another thing which is responsive. So those two things are coming into play when we're delivering this out. So Drupal 7 does all that now. So what Open Public does is it takes that, it takes lots and lots of experience and lots of people, lots of other agencies feeding back into, I guess, phase 2 and that team, and they've said, look, this is what we think the default build for someone in government should look like. So Steve, move to the next slide. So what they've done is they've basically, everybody understands the concept of a profile for Drupal. Someone basically bakes Drupal in a particular way. On the second or first screen it says, what do you want, standard, custom, or a profile? That's where a profile sits. And what a profile really does is it basically pre-configures the site to a very kind of finite point. So we have Open Public attach itself to the core of Drupal, and that is a whole load of modules, a theme, and it's been configured and tested with that combination. So just like the previous screen, if I was to set out and start looking for some modules, looking for some things, it would be the first time I would have done it, maybe the second or third or fourth time, because I might have a favourite, and so I start to get a bit of a collection of these things myself I can start to use on projects. So they put some modules in. There's 50 modules in Open Public added to the core modules. And you'll see that these are things, most of them are familiar to you. There's views, there's node queues, there's capture, there's some like this kind of things. It's a lot of functionality there. I won't go through all of the modules, but that's to say they've been considered and configured to actually for an outcome. And the outcome is the Open Public website. So they've also identified that they need to do something with the theme, obviously the responsiveness of it, because they're getting that as a requirement. So they've sub-themed Amiga, and Amiga really is it's an emerging, I guess, best practice for doing responsive design. There are lots of them moving towards that now, but Amiga was out there first, and I think they're Alpha 4 now with their products, so they're mature, basically. So Open Public have themed the Alpha theme, which is important. So at that level you've got Drupal with some more functionality, the theme that's been considered as an adaptive theme, and then we'll go to the next level, which is basically, I guess, the really important feature, I guess, because up until now it's all been Drupal, you're all used to this. Hopefully you've all seen profiles before, you've used custom modules. So the combination of what they've done here with a couple of modules is a new way of delivering the user interface, and that is with 3 new modules, or 2 new modules called Delta and Context, and then that would give you the responsiveness. So that gives you the combination of those 3 things give you this incredible flexibility to say, you don't have to worry about things like, I'm going to have this block and it appears on this page, and you have to kind of keep all this wiring in your head to say, oh well, this section doesn't show this and this section doesn't show that, and you normally do that with blocks and you hide and turn them off and do that, and that's fairly clunky. So what the actual delta and context add to Drupal is the ability to say, if the page, or if the user, or if the section, or if the URL, or if the content type is X, then that's the context, and then it uses a delta to actually move things around. So my delta of the site is left column, right column, header, footer. For my home page, I might want to basically take that 2-column split and make it 1 column. So that's 1 delta. And then I use context to drive different variations of that. So for example, if the user wasn't logged in, show a little panel at the top that says log me, please log in. If the user was logged in, that panel wouldn't be there. So you're not doing it in blocks, you're not hiding blocks anymore. It's a whole context you're dealing with, as far as you can treat every single element of a Drupal site as something that you can basically trigger a reaction. So the reaction is, I turn up to the site, go to the home page on a mobile device. We obviously know with media queries and CSS that we get a dimension out of that, so we get 240 or whatever the device is. So then we need Drupal to respond to that really quickly and give us that page as a 1-column thing. So that's where these two things come into play. The context is that, hey, I'm a mobile, so start changing things around. Maybe drop the menu. If you're on a page, a second-level page, and they just want to read the thing they've just clicked on, you don't really want to show them the menu again and all this other stuff. They just want to read that article. And on a mobile device, the screen real estate is very small, so give them the best opportunity of getting it. You'd hide the menu maybe, move some things to the bottom, and make the content a little bit bigger or something. So that's something you do with a context and delta, basically. That gives you that flexibility to do that. So with Amiga, Amiga comes, the third thing was Amiga. So Amiga, delta, and context give you that combination. So Amiga gives you a whole set of regions and sections, and the delta basically makes different configurations of them. In the past, you used to have to use the node dot template and all the other kind of templates to actually do those different configurations. There were some modules that let you do it, like views lets you split things up and move things around, but I don't think views is very responsive. It doesn't really know what to do if it gets squashed, so I think views will move to that paradigm of, I'm very flexible, I can do whatever I want. There was a display suite. There were a few other modules that alluded to the fact that you could actually template really easily and come up with different sections and manage the sort of look and feel of the site. It wasn't as easy as it appeared most of the time, because you had to break into template code. Views, you had to sort of extend the base code into views to get things happening. So you always actually ended up in some kind of PHP template, changing things around. And that's something that's gone away with this combination. Very rarely would I have to go to any PHP or any template. And that's a good thing, because I'm not really messing with the core of Drupal. I can basically update on top of that the whole time, and I don't have to worry about it, because as soon as I start changing the core or changing the base templates that come with things, and if I haven't set it up properly, that's where it could bite me again if I start upgrading. So the whole emphasis of what they're doing here is putting a base into your organisation that you can extend, and as the collective people on Open Public figure things out, there's a security issue over here. We had a department over here the day a new browser came along and they didn't know what to do with it, and all this information gets fed back into a central point, and then that is decided that goes into the next iteration of this product. So it's not just you doing this, it's not just you looking every day going, oh, it doesn't work in Firefox 8 or something. It's the community, and not just the Drupal community, but a very focused community of people who are in government, who are looking for these problems, they're aware of these problems, especially the accessibility stuff. And it's nice as a developer to have that in your back of your head and not continually worry about all that stuff. So with the build comes with a whole lot of content, so ministers and press releases and what we do. So what you see as a normal government site, it pretty much takes every sort of element out of that and puts it in there. So it extends the content type, so it makes a set of ministers, it makes the media release stuff, it makes the press release. It makes breaking news all happen. It sets up these node queues for you to actually, from an authoring perspective, to push stuff, just, you know, things are happening rapidly, and they sort of sense in some large government agencies things do happen rapidly. They might have to be responding to something every hour. You know, they might want to, they're updating the public. That's what the public are looking at for information. So they've really thought about that process of getting content onto the, you know, onto the front page or a news release. Push the button once, it appears in the news release section, it appears in the What's News section, and it appears in the breaking news ticker on the front page. So they've actually you know, augmented a bit of the workflow in there to make it easier. So they would have identified that in all their experience with government departments, saying, you know, we just don't know what we're publishing to, or all these problems. Is it live? We're not sure. Can we delay this? So those issues were solved in Open Public, along with the issues of the admin user interface for Drupal. I think Bartik is the default thing for Drupal admin. Anyway, they realised there was, you know, save buttons down the bottom, and it was not very consistent. What Open Public has actually done is they've reskinned the entire admin UI, and they've really simplified it, and it looks great. So that's the first thing that I noticed when I'm using it. It was that everything was where you expected it to be, and there was some consistency across the UI, which was lacking somewhat. They've also thought about users, editors, authors, who can release things. So that's built in already, so you have roles built in. You just have to map those to your organisation, and they're fairly simple, so it shouldn't be too hard. You can obviously extend that as much as you need to. You don't have to go to, there is a module called Maestro, which is a workflow module, which is really quite complicated. There is a path there to go down that path. It was a multi-step process for publishing. Even went off-site externally and then came back again, so that can happen. But what they've done here is they've actually just simplified the process of publishing content to the site. They've not made it so, you know, I have to have a technical experience with the back end of Drupal. I can just go along and edit it. Drupal ACT, they're talking about, you know, editing in context. So if I was this was a website and I wanted to change that, I'd click on it, type in and change and save. So they try to sort of completely abstract that idea of this thing has got its own different edit screen. And there's a lot of data, that probably wouldn't be a great thing to do, but just content. Someone wants to go and change the new minister, they can just go to the page and type it in. So we saw that in Contribute, an Adobe product or Macromedia product about 10 years ago, where it was a $89 product, and you just go to your website, click edit and type and save. That was it. That's people got used to that, people like that. Having to go to your Drupal, log in, go to the content, filter, go by, you know, find the content. It's not that hard, but there's 4 or 5 extra steps that could be taken away with some of these new things in Drupal 8. So it's not here yet, but they've actually thought about some of that, and it's in the build. So where we start to get up to delivery to clients, we always have a responsive design that moves around and knows what to do on different devices. We have adaptive, so for example, if we have a big logo on our widescreen plasma television at home, we can do that. And as we start to move down, we tend to sort of make different you know, size JPEGs as we move down. And that's kind of scaling the graphics. And so there's some initiatives, especially with HTML5 and CSS3, where I could use a web font or something, and that could adapt to the size. So I wouldn't actually have to have 8 or 10 different images of different sizes. I could just use a web font that's on a cloud somewhere, so everybody has access to it. And then using CSS, I could basically manipulate that graphic to be any size or any shape I wanted, because at that point it's mathematical. It's not pixels we're dealing with. And that's a really efficient way to do things, because if you think about it, it's the same logo, it's just a different size, but your graphical team are having to produce all of that content. So there are things down the line that are changing that as well, and CSS3 HTML5 is one of them. So what do you get once you've installed it? You get, I'm not sure if you've seen the site, it basically looks like a government website, acts like a government website, it behaves like a responsive design, so that all works well. What this particular version has, it has 508 compliance in the US, so that's not a very rigorous process. It means you can stand, use a computer. There's about 4 things on it that they have to meet, keyboard, things like that. So it's not that rigorous. So what we're going to do at Link, and we're starting to do already, is to look at the WCAG 2 guidelines and check off against what this has, and start to feed some of that back into Open Public. So we should have some WCAG to accessibility and checklists and various things with our build. So you've got it running, and this is where we've got to, and we're getting past this next stage now, is that that's all fine, except we don't want our site to look like open public. We want to actually move things around and change things. So the obvious first step is to start playing around in this space, changing the theme, changing the modules. Problem is when they do a new release, I'm going to have to manage it very carefully what I've done to make sure I don't mess anything up. So what we've decided to do is we're going to basically profile the profile. So we're going to keep Open Public Profile as it is. So when any of this whole stack gets updated, we don't have to worry about it. We can either let Drupal do it itself, update. We can either wait for Open Public to release, which is probably wise because they've done some testing, they've talked to their clients, they've probably got a few versions out there already they're testing, and then everything's working. Obviously they've got unit tests and all sorts of testing that they can do, and they say, yep, we're going to go to version 1.1. And so behind the scenes one day, all of that gets updated and doesn't break anything. That's the idea. So where we can extend this is we can basically, Department X has got a profile that sub-profiles this profile, which just basically says the dependencies are this, and I can break dependencies and I can basically break the configuration, because what this has is from the profile, it's installing stuff. It's installing deltas, menu items, context, and you might not want any of them for your website because they're a particular way. Most of them are probably 90% there. You probably will use the look and the layouts because it's fairly standard. So sort of across government, left nav, right nav, left box, right box, header, footer, it's fairly standard. So you're not going to be changing it too much. But if you do change it, you can do it in a safe way where you can basically keep developing and then have this core mature as the product matures, and as everybody else, you'll find out that they're going to put 5 new modules into here that you might already be working with here. So that's something you can basically say, well, we don't have to put it in here, we can wait till it comes into the core. You don't want to be tied to timelines or anything like that, but you could do it here for now, and when this one comes out and you release, you just basically release the dependencies in the profile to say, well, okay, back over to you, you now have control of that module, and if it gets updated, then it gets updated as part of your update. So we would do that, we would profile the profile, sub-profile the profile. We would look at any modules that we potentially would want to put in, and this is a really interesting point, or segue, I guess, to what's happening with this particular thing. I didn't mention it earlier because it's only kind of really new, but apps and features is something they're looking at doing. So I don't actually, if I want to turn on some functionality from a government department perspective, we say, oh, Department B just turned on a forum or they turned on a map and we want that functionality. Traditionally you'd go, oh, well, no, they might use these modules, I'll get the GMAP module, the location module, and I'll do this stuff and I'll try to replicate that functionality. So what's happening now in Drupal across the community, not just in this pub, you'll see 3 or 4 people now who are talking about applications. So the application is for open public, and they've got a few already in there, so I want to turn on a forum. I press the button, and that sets off a process of a pre-configured installation script of 3 modules, menus, deltas, context, to actually just put that whole bit of functionality into your website. So you don't have to configure, all you do is press the button. So that's the dream. The reality is that it's just starting to happen. There's 2 companies now who offer like a kitchen sink of applications, which might actually total of 50 modules, but you don't actually see that. You just see that from the application level. So I want to install some content translation on my site. I click the application. I'd like to show it to you, but it's already take too long. But it's gone that next level up. I'm not dealing with a set of widgets to add functionality. They're talking about applications, and now I can turn them on wholesale. So that's something that's in here. They've set that up to go in here. With the Open Atrium build that Phase 2 did 2 years ago, they funded 3 modules to go back to the community. So this is the White House team. They developed a thing called Idea, which basically ranked content by people liking it. There was a couple that they put back into the community. So White House has spent a lot of money on these modules and they've put them back into Drupal. Open Public have picked them up and put them back into there. So that'll happen a lot more, and you'll see people. They've got another product called Open Publish, and they're dealing with Al Jazeera and Reuters, and so all the best practice from those industries are coming into that Open Publish product. The Open Public product is the same thing's happening with government. The government say, oh, we need this new functionality. We need to have a map of where all the politicians are tweeting, and we need to have their locations tweeted on the map. That's already in Open Public. There's a mapping component in there. You just attach the type of content type to it. There's a Twitter thing in there you need to hook up to your account. That basically, there's 2 or 3 steps, and then all of a sudden the site's just got this whole new lot of functionality, which is what the politicians, where they are, what they're saying, which is great. So there'll be a whole lot of development work for features going on, and we're looking at features across government to say that, okay, well, 10 people need to build this over the next 12 months to meet this particular initiative. So what can we do to sort of corral that effort in, co-develop a module, share it across the platform, and then put it back into the community. So that's the sort of where we're going as far as what we do to this build, is to put it back into the community, because the last thing we want to do is play in this space of custom modules and, as Steve said earlier, be the subject matter expert of it, but I don't think there's many opportunities left in Drupal for that to happen. It's already happened. People have already identified that, oh, it has to be responsive, we have to be mobile friendly. So that big wave has just hit Drupal, and it's going to sort of trickle through the product over the next couple of years. But I can't think of anything else that's on the horizon that is of that significance. It's probably the biggest thing to happen in web for the last 10 years is the fact we now have to cater for different devices. We talked about it for a long time. Apple did something about it, and now everybody's followed. Now we actually have to. Now the numbers are there to say that mobile is actually overtaken. It's now the concept is mobile first. So I basically have my site ready for mobile first. That's its base state, and everything else is an extension or adding to that. So that's a big flip from what we were 5 years ago to say that we're 960 grid and we're not going to change. That's 960 grid. The grids are still great, but we're not stuck to 960 anymore. We can move that around. So features is important because it basically means I don't have to worry myself. I don't have to get into the details of what modules. I mean, obviously there are people who will want to do that, but from a non-technical perspective, it's a great opportunity to say, look, we just need this functionality. We need to turn it on. We can turn it on. And then this level here, which is obviously important in this town. So this build that extends open public. We'll obviously have to look at some of this. So that's what we're working on now, is to say that does this out of the box, what's wrong with it? And we'll feed that back in, and hopefully a lot of other people feed that back in. And so the next version of this that comes out will address some of this stuff. So the Australian side of things, so it's different in the US. I know there's a European effort going on at the moment to do it. So they're looking at WCAG2, and they'll have a European build of Open Public shortly. So part of the regionalisation, I guess, customization for Open Public, you only have to answer about 5 things. Is what's the first day of the week, what's your time offset, and there's a couple more that you need to set. I think that's it. Once you've done that, you're told of that, which are regional kind of variations, and it's ready to go. So extending it through profiles, maintaining it through things like analytics. Google Analytics is built in. The features basically, you're basically relying on all of this effort and people and community to get that feature to your field. So there's not going to be too much maintenance around that because it's been tested. I mean, obviously there's content maintenance and maintenance of the site itself as far as the content, but everything else should be looked after. I think that's all I really want to say about at the moment. It's exciting times. Thanks very much.
I know we're running quite long, so just very quick summary. So Martin's obviously looked at this in great detail. We're not the only ones. There are a bunch of people looking at Open Public, and it's more the concept of distributions are a really good place to invest your time if you're doing Drupal work for a particular government customer. And that government customer has a very long-term plan. Like, they have to manage a web platform. They've got multiple assets that they have to actually bring within some sort of roadmap. And if you're going to go down the Drupal route, you might as well look at distributions to simplify your ongoing management over that long-term plan. So for us, we tend to think that Open Public is a really good way for us to build equity in our client's web management platform over that long term. And it also means that, you know, if we're aligning our projects with Drupal, it allows us to extend the value that we're providing to our customers, because we can now, you know, whether we're doing it with Acquia or on-site DSD certified infrastructure or whatever it might be, we can start to provide hosting specifically for the web deployments that we've set up for our customers, provide break-fix support from the hosting infrastructure all the way through the application layer on Drupal, all the way to helping content authors when they've accidentally deleted content from that sort of, you know, very human-friendly point of view. And that's sort of like the whole roadmap for our customers, how we can support them from the bottom all the way up to the top. And the other thing, when it comes to actual projects, websites shouldn't be that hard. And what a good distribution should give us is 90% of the functionality. What that means is that the remaining outliers, 5% on the left side and 5% on the right side, we get to focus a lot more attention on that and get a much higher quality outcome for the customer, rather than building everything from scratch every time, or rather than, you know, having to wire everything up from component parts or even just a PHP framework, for example. And it was already mentioned before that DrupalCon is coming up, so everyone should be going to that, February 6 to 9. I mentioned to Acquia that I would be spruiking about the Do More with Drupal webinar on the 25th of September, so have a look at domorewithdrupal.com.au to register for that. And Link itself is also hosting a comms workshop which covers off not just this is actually a tiny part of it, but responsive design and web management practice sort of within government agencies, how to manage content over the long term, things like that. So that's on 20th of September. You can find information on our website. Thank you very much for letting us monopolise some time.